There is a deep psychological fear that letting go of something means losing a piece of oneself, that open hands represent emptiness, and that stepping away from familiar attachments will result in absolute nothingness. When looked closely at the nature of existence, a different truth begins to emerge, revealing that the act of releasing what no longer serves the soul is actually the greatest gain a person can ever experience. Think of a traveler walking a long path under the scorching sun, carrying a heavy sack filled with rocks that they mistakenly believe to be precious gold. With every mile that passes, the straps of the sack dig deeper into their shoulders, their breath becomes shallow, their feet grow weary, and they can no longer look up to admire the beautiful scenery of the green hills and blue rivers along the way. They refuse to set the sack down because they are terrified that if they put it away, they will have nothing left, failing to see that the heavy burden itself is the only thing preventing them from moving forward with absolute freedom. The moments of genuine peace only arrive when the traveler finally musters the courage to open the sack, look at the heavy stones without judgment, and gently place them on the side of the road, realizing that their hands are now free to hold the flowers, to touch the cool water, and to embrace the vast sky. During the time of the Enlightened One, there was a man named Kisa who possessed immense wealth, but his mind was constantly plagued by an overwhelming anxiety about losing his gold, his properties, and his social standing. He spent his days counting his coins, locking his doors, and viewing everyone around him with a sense of deep suspicion, believing that his entire identity was built upon the structures of his material success. One evening, a sudden fire broke out in the storage rooms of his estate, consuming a large portion of his earthly treasures before his very eyes, leaving him in a state of absolute despair, weeping for the loss of what he considered his lifeblood. He ran into the quiet forest, crying out in agony, feeling completely empty and destroyed, until he happened to sit near the tree where the teacher was resting in profound silence. The awakened one looked at the weeping man with eyes filled with boundless compassion, not offering heavy intellectual lectures, but simply radiating a gentle warmth that allowed the man to calm his racing heart. The teacher picked up a dry leaf that had fallen from the branch above, placed it in the palm of the man, and asked if the tree had truly lost something valuable when the leaf withered and fell away. The man looked at the dry leaf, feeling the softness of the evening breeze, and suddenly understood that the tree did not weep for the lost leaf, because it knew that by letting the old go, it allowed the deep roots to gather strength for the new spring. The fire that consumed the material wealth was not a punishment, but a sudden clearing of space, a moment where the universe forced the man to see that his true value did not reside in the locked boxes of his burning mansion. When the man stopped clinging to the image of who he used to be, a profound sense of lightness filled his chest, and he realized that the space created by the loss was immediately filled with peace, clarity, and an unshakable inner freedom. The human heart is very much like a beautiful vase that can only hold a certain amount of pure water, and if it is already packed to the brim with old, stagnant, muddy memories, there is simply no room left for the fresh streams of joy to enter. People often find themselves trapped in the painful cycles of past hurts, constantly replaying old arguments, holding on to bitter grudges against those who have wronged them, and nurturing a quiet resentment that eats away at their happiness. They believe that by holding on to anger, they are somehow protecting themselves or punishing the other person, but in reality, they are drinking poison while hoping that the other individual will suffer. Anger is a burning coal that people hold tightly in their palms with the intention of throwing it at someone else, but before the coal ever leaves their hand, it is their own flesh that is scorched and scarred. The moment a person decides to open their fingers, to let the hot coal fall to the ground, they are not condoning the bad behavior of others, nor are they admitting defeat in the games of the world. They are simply choosing to heal their own wounds, to stop the bleeding of their own hearts, and to allow the fresh skin of peace to grow over the spaces that were once burned by malice. There was a young monk in an ancient monastery who was known for his intense dedication to studying the sacred texts, but he found himself unable to achieve the deep states of meditation because his mind was filled with a lingering bitterness toward a classmate who had insulted him years ago. He went to the elder master of the temple, complaining that despite his hours of sitting in silence, his chest felt tight, his thoughts were turbulent, and the image of his offender kept appearing like a dark cloud. The master did not speak a word, but instead gave the young monk an empty clay pot, instructing him to carry it with him everywhere he went, whether he was eating, walking, sleeping, or sweeping the courtyard. The young monk obeyed, carrying the heavy pot day after day, finding it incredibly inconvenient, until his arms ached, his posture became crooked, and he could no longer perform his daily duties with any sense of ease. After a week of intense discomfort, the monk approached the master again, begging to be allowed to set the vessel down, explaining that the constant weight was ruining his health and disrupting his concentration. The master smiled gently, asking why the monk had been willing to carry a heavy, empty pot for a whole week, while simultaneously carrying a heavy, poisonous grudge in his heart for many years without ever questioning its utility. The young monk stood still as the realization washed over him, seeing that the grudge was nothing more than an internal clay pot, filled with the dust of the past, ruining his spiritual growth and stealing his present happiness. He let the physical pot slide from his hands, allowing it to shatter on the stone floor, and in that precise moment of fracturing, he also released the old resentment, feeling an immediate wave of relief wash over his entire being. When people let go of the need to control every single outcome of their lives, they do not become passive, lazy, or indifferent to the world around them, but rather they enter into a state of harmonious alignment with the natural flow of existence. The world operates on a cosmic law of constant change, a beautiful rhythm where seasons transition without effort, flowers bloom and fade, and rivers wind through valleys without ever demanding that the mountains move out of their way. Human suffering arises when people attempt to stand in the middle of this rushing river of change, trying desperately to build permanent dams out of their desires, hoping to keep things exactly as they are forever. They want their youth to last eternally, they want their relationships to remain completely static, they want their successes to never experience a downturn, and when the inevitable wind of change blows, their rigid structures collapse, causing immense psychological pain. By embracing the art of letting go, individuals transform their rigid walls into flexible sails, allowing the winds of life to guide them smoothly across the ocean of existence without the constant fear of capsizing. Think about the way a tree handles the arrival of autumn. As the temperature drops and the light fades, the tree does not fight against the changing weather, nor does it hold on to its golden leaves with desperation. It does not go into a state of depression or anxiety, wondering if it will ever see the green of summer again, but instead it trustingly allows the leaves to drop, standing bare and vulnerable against the cold winter sky. This period of barrenness is not a death, but a sacred phase of deep rest, an inward turning of energy that allows the tree to preserve its essential life force in the depths of the earth, preparing for a magnificent rebirth. If the tree resisted autumn, if it spent all its energy trying to hold on to every single leaf, it would freeze during the winter storms, its branches would snap under the weight of the snow, and its roots would perish from utter exhaustion. Human beings must learn this wisdom from nature, understanding that there are phases in life where holding on is an act of destruction, and letting go is the highest form of self-preservation and wisdom. There is a beautiful story from the ancient texts about a wealthy merchant named Dhananjaya, who had spent his entire life building a massive commercial empire, securing trade routes across continents, and accumulating heaps of rare gems and silks. He believed that his identity was inextricably linked to his status as the wealthiest man in the valley, and he derived immense pride from the fact that people bowed when he walked through the crowded marketplaces. As he grew older, a severe illness overtook his physical body, confining him to his luxurious bed, where he lay surrounded by his gold, yet feeling a profound, terrifying loneliness that none of his riches could soothe. He called for the wisest sages of the region, demanding that they give him a remedy to ease the immense weight in his chest, but the medicines of the physicians and the incantations of the priests brought no relief to his troubled spirit. One day, a wandering disciple of the Enlightened One passed by his mansion, asking for nothing but a cup of pure water, and seeing the suffering of the merchant, the disciple sat by the edge of the bed. The disciple did not offer empty platitudes, but instead asked the merchant to look out the grand window at the vast clouds floating effortlessly across the blue sky, changing their shapes every second without leaving a single scar on the heavens. The disciple explained that the merchant had spent his life gathering clouds, believing he could own them, failing to realize that the sky is beautiful precisely because it allows the clouds to come and go without ever clinging to their forms. The illness was not stealing his life, but rather stripping away the illusions that had kept his soul in a state of perpetual imprisonment, forcing him to see that he was not the wealth he accumulated, but the spacious awareness that witnessed it all. The merchant closed his eyes, breathed in deeply, and for the first time in his life, he consciously let go of his attachment to his empire, his reputation, and his material body, allowing himself to simply exist in the present moment. In that surrender, the heavy armor of anxiety that he had worn for decades dissolved completely, replaced by a radiant, tranquil joy that made him feel wealthier than he had ever been when his vaults were overflowing with gold. Many times, people hold on to toxic relationships, dead-end jobs, and destructive habits simply because they are afraid of the unknown space that lies beyond the boundaries of their current comfort zones. They prefer a familiar misery over an unfamiliar freedom, sticking with situations that drain their vitality, crush their spirits, and dim their inner light, because the thought of stepping into the emptiness feels too terrifying to bear. What they fail to realize is that the void is not a black hole designed to swallow them whole, but a fertile womb of infinite possibilities, a blank canvas waiting for the brushstrokes of a new, authentic life. When you have the courage to say goodbye to what is breaking your spirit, the universe does not leave you empty-handed, but instead opens up paths that you could have never imagined while you were busy clinging to the old structures. The space that opens up when you let go is a sacred vacuum, and by the very laws of nature, a vacuum must be filled, not with more clutter, but with the things that truly resonate with the highest truth of who you are. Consider the metaphor of a child trying to catch a beautiful, fragile butterfly in a garden, running frantically across the grass, sweating, straining, and desperately lunging forward to trap the creature within their closed fists. If the child succeeds in trapping the butterfly, they must keep their hand tightly clenched, unable to use that hand for anything else, and inside the dark, confined space, the delicate wings of the butterfly are crushed, destroying the very beauty that attracted the child in the first place. If the child learns to sit quietly on the grass, opening their palm completely wide, relaxing their muscles, and breathing in harmony with the surrounding flowers, the butterfly will often fly down voluntarily, landing gently on the open hand. In that open space, the beauty of the butterfly can be fully appreciated in its living, breathing glory, and the child's hand remains free, relaxed, and unburdened, experiencing the joy of connection without the necessity of possession. True love, genuine friendship, and authentic success operate on this very same principle, thriving only in environments of freedom, and withering away the moment the grip of control and possessiveness becomes too tight. When you love someone, you do not build a golden cage around them to keep them close, but rather you cultivate a beautiful garden that makes them want to stay, while giving them full permission to fly away whenever they need to. By letting go of the desire to possess the people in your life, you actually deepen the bond of connection, because they stay with you out of free will, love, and resonance, rather than out of obligation, guilt, or fear of conflict. In the records of the ancient path, there is a story about a dedicated mother named Gautami, who experienced the deepest heartbreak a human being can endure when her young child fell ill and passed away unexpectedly. Driven mad by her grief, she carried the lifeless body of her babe from house to house throughout the village, begging her neighbors for a medicine that would restore the breath to her child's lungs, but everyone turned away in sorrow, knowing that no such remedy existed on earth. Eventually, a wise elder directed her to the mountain where the teacher was staying, suggesting that if there was anyone in the world who could perform a miracle, it would be the Blessed One. She ran up the mountain path, her clothes torn, her eyes wild with sorrow, and laid the cold body of her child at the feet of the great sage, weeping uncontrollably and demanding a medicine to wake her baby from the eternal sleep. The teacher did not scold her for her delusion, nor did he lecture her on the impermanence of physical life, knowing that intellectual words cannot penetrate a heart that is completely shattered by grief. Instead, he looked at her with profound tenderness and told her that he could indeed create a medicine to heal her child, but he required a single ingredient to make the formula work. He instructed her to go back into the village and bring him a handful of mustard seeds, but with one strict condition: the seeds must come from a household where no one had ever lost a child, a parent, a spouse, or a friend. Filled with a sudden burst of hope, Gautami rushed down the mountain, knocking on the door of the very first house she encountered, asking eagerly for mustard seeds, which the family gladly offered to give her. As she reached out to take them, she remembered the condition of the sage and asked if anyone had ever died in their family, to which the master of the house replied with tears that they had buried their grandfather just the previous winter. She thanked them, left the seeds behind, and went to the next house, only to learn that a young daughter had passed away there a few years ago, and at the third house, she discovered that a beloved servant had recently died. She walked from door to door, visiting every single home in the vast village, from the grandest palaces of the nobility to the humblest huts of the laborers, and everywhere she went, she found the same heartbreaking truth: death had visited every single home. As the sun began to set behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty roads, a deep realization began to dawn within the mind of Gautami, lifting the heavy veil of madness from her consciousness. She understood that she was not alone in her suffering, that grief was a universal thread binding all living beings together, and that her desperate attempt to hold on to the physical form of her dead child was an impossible rebellion against the natural law of decay. She carried the body of her child to the quiet forest, laid it down gently with a heart full of reverence, and returned to the mountain, standing before the teacher with a calm, serene expression on her face. The sage asked if she had brought the mustard seeds, and she replied that she no longer needed them, because she had found a far greater medicine, the wisdom of letting go of her exclusive attachment to her personal sorrow. By releasing her tight grip on her individual grief, she opened her heart to the collective suffering of all humanity, transforming her immense pain into a boundless ocean of empathy, compassion, and spiritual awakening. The story of Gautami illustrates that letting go is not an act of cold indifference, abandonment, or lack of love, but rather it is the maturation of love into its highest, most sublime form. When you cling to a specific form, a specific outcome, or a specific person, your love is limited by fear, anxiety, and the constant dread of loss, which turns your affection into a source of suffering for both yourself and others. When you develop the inner maturity to let go, your love becomes as vast as the sky, accommodating the arrival and departure of all things with equal grace, warmth, and absolute peace. People often struggle with letting go because they confuse the concept of letting go with giving up, believing that to let go means to accept defeat, to lose one's drive, or to show weakness in the face of life's challenges. Giving up is born out of a sense of helplessness, resentment, and despair, where a person stops trying because they feel overwhelmed by external circumstances and bitter about their apparent failure. Letting go, on the other hand, is an act of supreme strength, courage, and inner clarity, where an individual recognizes that fighting against an unchangeable reality is an exercise in futility that only drains their precious energy. It is the conscious decision to stop fighting the waves and instead learn how to float, trusting that the water itself will support them if they stop flailing their arms in panic. Imagine a person trapped in a quicksand pit. The more frantically they kick, punch, and struggle against the sand, the faster they sink into the depths, because their very resistance creates a downward suction that pulls them under. The only way to survive in quicksand is to stop struggling, to lie flat on one's back, to spread one's arms wide, and to remain completely still, allowing the buoyancy of the sand to keep them afloat until help arrives. In the exact same way, when people face difficult situations in life, their mental struggling, their constant worrying, and their inner resistance are the very things that cause them to sink deeper into anxiety and despair. By letting go of the internal resistance, by accepting the situation exactly as it is in the present moment, they stop the downward spiral, creating a calm mental space where clear solutions can naturally arise. There was an old woodcarver who lived in a remote village, famous for creating the most intricate, beautiful spiritual statues out of rare timber, which he sold to monasteries across the land. One year, he spent 6 months working tirelessly on a magnificent piece of sandalwood, carving the image of a serene deity, investing all his creative passion, his skill, and his savings into this singular masterpiece. Just as he was putting the finishing touches on the statue, a sudden tremor shook his workshop, causing a heavy iron tool to fall from the shelf above, striking the statue directly in the center and splitting it into 2 uneven pieces. The old woodcarver stood frozen, looking at the ruined labor of 6 months, a piece of art that was supposed to secure his financial future and cement his reputation as the finest artisan in the province. A neighbor who heard the commotion rushed into the workshop, seeing the broken sandalwood, and began to wail in sympathy, cursing the bad luck and urging the carver to sue the toolmaker or abandon his craft in despair. The old man did not weep, nor did he express anger. Instead he sat down on his wooden stool, picked up the 2 broken pieces of sandalwood, looked at their unique fractures for a long time, and smiled. He told his neighbor that the original statue he had imagined was gone, and no amount of crying would put the wood back together exactly as it was before the tremor. He explained that the break was not an end, but an invitation from the wood itself to create something entirely new, something that could accommodate the fracture rather than denying it. He took his chisel, began to work with the two separate pieces, and within a few weeks, he transformed them into two beautiful, intertwined figures representing harmony and resilience, which were far more expressive and moving than the original statue could ever have been. A high official passed through the village, saw the new creation, and bought it for triple the price of the original statue, deeply touched by the unique story of beauty arising out of brokenness. This story beautifully demonstrates that when life breaks your plans, it is not an indication that your journey is over, but an opportunity to create a new narrative that is richer, deeper, and more beautiful than the one you had originally scripted for yourself. If the woodcarver had spent his days crying over the broken pieces, trying desperately to glue them back together to fit his old vision, he would have wasted his time, ruined the fragrance of the sandalwood, and missed the inspiration for his greatest masterpiece. Letting go of the old plan is the prerequisite for discovering the new path, and those who possess the flexibility to bend with the wind will never be broken by the storms of life. Consider the nature of the mind itself, which is constantly generating thoughts, emotions, memories, and projections, much like an ocean that is always producing waves of various shapes and sizes. Many people spend their entire lives trying to control their thoughts, fighting against their negative emotions, trying to force themselves to feel happy when they are sad, or peaceful when they are anxious. This internal warfare only creates more friction, because the part of the mind that is trying to control the thoughts is the very same mind that is creating the confusion in the first place. The true secret to mental peace does not lie in stopping the waves of the ocean, which is an impossible task, but in learning to be the spacious ocean itself, which allows the waves to rise, crest, and dissolve without being disturbed by their motion. When an anxious thought arises in your mind, instead of fighting it, trying to push it away, or judging yourself for having it, simply allow it to be there, look at it with curiosity, and let it pass away on its own. A thought only has power over you if you feed it with your attention, if you believe its story, or if you fight against it with resistance. When you simply observe a thought without clinging to it or pushing it away, it loses its energy, slows down, and eventually dissolves back into the vast stillness of your awareness, leaving you completely untouched. There was an ancient king who ruled over a prosperous territory, but he was a man of volatile emotions, experiencing extreme highs when his armies won a battle, and falling into deep depression when a minor crop failure occurred. Realizing that his emotional instability was harming his ability to govern his kingdom with justice, he summoned all the wise philosophers, scholars, and spiritual teachers of his land to his court. He issued a challenge, demanding that they create a ring for him, something that would stabilize his mind, a talisman that would make him happy when he was sad, and keep him humble when he was celebrating a great victory. The wise men consulted with one another for many days, debating deep philosophical concepts, looking through ancient scrolls, but they could not find a solution that could fulfill such a specific, powerful request. Finally, an old, quiet mystic who lived in a cave outside the city walls approached the palace, presenting a simple wooden ring to the king, with a request that the king should only read the inscription carved inside the ring during moments of absolute emotional extremity. A few months later, a powerful neighbor invaded the kingdom without warning, defeating the king's armies, plundering the capital, and forcing the king to flee into the mountains on horseback to save his life. Hidden in a dark cave, hearing the hoofbeats of the enemy soldiers searching for him in the valleys below, the king felt an overwhelming wave of terror, despair, and hopelessness wash over him. Remembering the wooden ring, he slipped it off his finger, turned it toward the faint light of the moon, and read the simple phrase carved into the wood, which said, this too shall pass." As he stared at those words, a profound silence fell over his racing mind, his rapid breathing slowed down, his heart stopped pounding against his ribs, and he realized the profound truth of that simple statement. The defeat, the loss of his crown, the danger of the moment, all of it was temporary, a passing cloud in the vast sky of time, just like his previous victories and glories had passed away. A few years later, the king gathered his loyal followers, reclaimed his throne, rebuilt his capital, and stood on the balcony of his grand palace while thousands of citizens cheered his name, showering him with flowers and praise. In that moment of supreme triumph, as his ego began to swell with pride and arrogance, he looked down at his hand, saw the wooden ring, and read the inscription once again, "This too shall pass." His pride dissolved instantly, replaced by a deep, humble serenity, and he looked at the cheering crowd not with a sense of personal superiority, but with a heart full of gentle, detached affection, knowing that the praise was just as fleeting as the blame. By understanding the transience of all worldly conditions, the king learned the ultimate art of letting go, allowing himself to experience both the joy of victory and the sorrow of defeat without being enslaved by either. The material world is a giant mirror reflecting back to us our internal attachments, and whenever we feel a sense of lack, emptiness, or dissatisfaction, it is usually a sign that we are looking for security in places where it cannot be found. People look for absolute security in money, in social status, in insurance policies, and in the promises of other flawed human beings, failing to see that the external world is inherently unstable, unpredictable, and constantly shifting. True security can never be found by accumulating external things, but only by developing an internal state of being that is comfortable with insecurity, a heart that is at peace with the unknown. When you are no longer afraid of losing anything, because you realize that your true essence cannot be taken away by any external event, you become truly invincible, moving through the world with an effortless joy and a radiant confidence. Think about a musician playing a beautiful melody on a bamboo flute, producing sounds that touch the very depths of the human soul, bringing tears to the eyes of those who listen. The flute can only produce these magnificent notes because it is completely hollow inside, containing no obstructions, no blockages, and no internal clutter to get in the way of the musician's breath. If the inside of the flute were packed tight with solid gold, precious gems, or rare silks, it would become completely useless as an instrument, producing nothing but a dull, lifeless thud when the musician blew into it. Human beings are very much like that flute, meant to be instruments through which the beautiful melody of life, love, and compassion can vibrate effortlessly into the world around them. When people pack their minds with the solid weights of ego, pride, opinions, prejudices, and material anxieties, they become dense, rigid, and incapable of producing any beautiful spiritual music. By consciously hollowing themselves out, by letting go of the heavy contents of their egos, they become open channels for the universal life force, allowing joy, creativity, and wisdom to flow through them into the lives of everyone they meet. In the classical records of the ancient order, there is a narrative about an advanced practitioner named Sona, who came from a family of extreme wealth and had lived a life of ultimate luxury before entering the spiritual community. Because he was accustomed to comfort, he decided to practice with an intense, aggressive discipline to prove his sincerity, walking up and down the stone paths of the forest until his feet bled, depriving himself of sleep, and fasting for days on end. Despite his heroic efforts, his mind remained agitated, restless, and completely far away from the peaceful states of liberation that he so desperately sought to attain. Frustrated, exhausted, and feeling like an absolute failure, he sat by the edge of a small river, contemplating packing up his robes and returning to his wealthy family, believing he was simply not cut out for the spiritual path. The enlightened one, knowing the thoughts of the young man, walked down to the riverbank, sat beside him, and asked a gentle question about Sona's past life as a musician before he became a monk. The teacher asked if Sona used to be skilled at playing the lute, a traditional stringed instrument, to which the young man replied with pride that he had indeed been an expert player in his youth. The sage then asked what happened to the music when the strings of the lute were tuned too tightly, to which Sona replied that the strings would snap under the tension, and the sound produced would be harsh and unpleasant to the ear. The teacher then asked what happened when the strings were tuned too loosely, and Sona explained that the strings would be floppy, completely unresponsive, and would fail to produce any melody at all. The awakened one smiled, nodding his head, and explained that the spiritual practice is exactly like tuning that lute. If you strain too hard, if you force your mind with aggressive ambition, your energy will snap, and if you are too lazy, your spirit will become dull and stagnant. The secret to liberation is to tune the mind to a middle path, letting go of both the aggressive desire for achievement and the lazy tendency toward indifference, allowing the inner strings to vibrate in perfect harmony. Sona understood the profound lesson, realizing that his spiritual practice had been fueled by the same egoic ambition that had driven his material life, a desperate desire to win, to achieve, and to possess enlightenment as a trophy. He relaxed his effort, let go of his expectations, stopped fighting his mind, and simply allowed himself to sit in a state of balanced awareness, free from the tension of striving. Within a very short time, his mind settled into a deep, unshakable peace, the music of his inner nature began to play automatically, and he attained the highest realization of freedom, not by doing more, but by letting go of the doer itself. The illusion of control is perhaps the most difficult aspect of the human ego to dismantle, as people mistakenly believe that they are the authors of every event in their lives, responsible for orchestrating the behavior of everyone around them. This delusion creates a permanent state of hypervigilance, where individuals are constantly worrying about tomorrow, trying to prevent bad things from happening, and fixing things that do not even need to be fixed. When you deeply analyze the complexity of the universe, you begin to see that there are billions of variables operating simultaneously, and your individual ego has control over an incredibly tiny fraction of those forces. By letting go of the false necessity to control everything, you are not stepping into chaos, but rather you are placing your trust in a higher intelligence that manages the orbit of the planets, the migration of the birds, and the beating of your own heart without any conscious assistance from your mind. Imagine a passenger riding in the back seat of a modern airplane, sitting stiffly in their chair, gripping the armrests until their knuckles turn white, sweating profusely, and straining their muscles to help lift the plane into the air. Their internal anxiety, their muscular tension, and their mental stress do absolutely nothing to assist the powerful engines of the aircraft, nor do they help the experienced pilot navigating through the clouds. The plane will fly beautifully whether the passenger is completely relaxed, reading a book, sipping a beverage, or sitting in a state of absolute terror and physical resistance. Most people live their daily lives exactly like that terrified passenger, believing that their constant worrying, their mental tension, and their emotional stress are somehow keeping their families safe, their businesses running, and their lives from falling apart. The moment you realize that life has its own magnificent momentum, that the universe knows exactly how to unfold without your frantic interference, you can finally lean back in your seat, relax your grip on the armrests, and enjoy the breathtaking view from the window. There was a respected master named Linji who was once approached by a student who was deeply anxious about his future, asking how he could prepare for the uncertainties of the coming years, how he could guarantee that he would always be safe. Linji told the student to follow him to the back of the monastery grounds, where a wild bamboo grove grew along the edge of a deep, rocky ravine. The master pointed to a tall, slender stalk of bamboo that was bending low under the pressure of a strong mountain wind, its tip almost touching the ground as the gust howled through the valley. When the wind suddenly stopped blowing, the bamboo did not snap, it did not remain bent, but instantly bounced back up into its upright position, standing tall, straight, and elegant against the evening sky. Linji explained that the bamboo survived the violent storm because it possessed the quality of emptiness inside and flexibility outside, allowing it to yield to the wind without resisting its force. If the bamboo had been rigid, hard, and unyielding like an old oak tree, its trunk would have cracked under the pressure of the gale, and its roots would have been ripped from the earth. To be safe in an uncertain future, you do not build thicker walls of resistance, but rather you develop the empty, flexible nature of the bamboo, letting go of your rigid expectations and flowing with whatever wind happens to blow. The act of letting go is closely tied to the virtue of forgiveness, which is often misunderstood as a sign of weakness, a way of letting someone who did you wrong off the hook without any consequences. Forgiveness has absolutely nothing to do with the other person, it is not an endorsement of their bad behavior, and it does not mean that you have to invite them back into your life to harm you again. Forgiveness is an entirely internal process, a conscious decision to cut the energetic cords of resentment that bind you to the person who hurt you, refusing to allow them to live rent-free in your mind any longer. When you hate someone, you are tied to them by a chain that is stronger than steel, and everywhere you go, you carry their image, their voice, and the memory of their insult with you, allowing them to ruin your present moments long after the actual event has ended. By practicing forgiveness, you are simply breaking that chain, letting go of your side of the burden, and allowing the offender to walk their own karmic path while you step forward into your own bright, unburdened future. You are choosing your own peace of mind over the petty desire for revenge, realizing that your energy is too precious to be wasted on holding on to old wounds that only make your soul sick. In the classical narratives of the early Sangha, there is an account of a man named Upali, who belonged to a low caste in society and had spent his entire life being despised, mistreated, and humiliated by the wealthy elites of the city. He carried a deep, justifiable reservoir of anger within his heart, viewing every member of the upper classes with intense hostility, always ready for a fight, and protecting himself with a thick armor of cynical defensiveness. One afternoon, he observed the enlightened one walking through the dusty streets, accompanied by kings, merchants, and sweepers alike, treating every single human being with the exact same level of profound respect, warmth, and dignity. Deeply moved, Upali approached the teacher, asking if a person of his low status, a person who had been broken by the cruelty of the world, could ever find a place in the spiritual community. The awakened one did not hesitate, he took Upali by the hand, welcomed him warmly into the order, and placed him in a position of high respect based entirely on his sincerity rather than his social background. Despite his new environment, Upali found that his mind was still plagued by the old ghosts of resentment, his heart hardening whenever he encountered monks who had previously belonged to the noble castes before ordaining. He went to the teacher, confessing that the memories of past humiliations were like sharp thorns embedded in his flesh, making him feel angry, separate, and unable to experience the true sweetness of meditation. The Blessed One took Upali to a quiet lotus pond near the monastery, pointing to a beautiful white flower that was blooming magnificently on the surface of the water, its petals pristine, clean, and completely free from any blemish. The teacher explained that the lotus grows out of the dark, thick, foul-smelling mud at the bottom of the pond, but it does not spend its life fighting the mud, complaining about the dirt, or blaming the swamp for its circumstances. If the lotus tried to hold on to the mud, if it internalized the filth, it would never be able to push its way through the water to bloom in the glorious sunlight. The lotus simply uses the nutrients of the mud to fuel its growth, while letting go of the dirt itself, allowing it to sink back to the bottom where it belongs, while the flower rises pure, independent, and beautiful above the water. The past mistreatment was the mud of Upali's life, a dark place where he had spent his youth, but he was no longer trapped in that swamp unless he chose to carry the mud inside his own mind. The moment Upali stopped defining himself by the cruelty of his past, the moment he let go of his resentment toward those who had harmed him, he rose above his circumstances, blooming into one of the most respected, wise, and peaceful teachers of the early community. Many people spend their entire lives chasing after the approval of others, molding their personalities, their careers, and their choices to fit the expectations of their parents, their friends, their employers, and society at large. They are terrified of being judged, criticized, or rejected, and so they wear masks that do not belong to them, speaking words that are not theirs, and living lives that are completely unauthentic to their true nature. This constant striving for external validation is an incredibly exhausting game that can never be won, because you can never please everyone, and the opinions of people are as fickle and unstable as the autumn weather. When you have the courage to let go of the need for approval, you are not becoming antisocial or rude, you are simply reclaiming your own life, stepping into your own power, and giving yourself permission to be exactly who you are. Think of how liberating it is to realize that what other people think about you is none of your business, that their judgments are merely reflections of their own internal conditioning, their own insecurities, and their own limited perspectives. When someone criticizes you, it says infinitely more about their own state of mind than it says about your worth as a human being. By letting go of the need to manage their perceptions, you free up a massive amount of internal energy that can be used to cultivate your own happiness, your own wisdom, and your own authentic contribution to the world. There was a wandering monk who lived during the early days of the transmission, known for his eccentric behavior and his absolute disregard for social conventions, spending his days sitting under a large banyan tree at the crossroads of a busy trade route. A wealthy landlord who lived in a nearby mansion passed by the tree every day, and he was deeply irritated by the monk's calm, content expression, viewing the monk's lack of ambition as an insult to those who worked hard to accumulate wealth. One afternoon, the landlord stopped his carriage, walked up to the monk, and began to insult him aggressively in front of a large crowd of onlookers, calling him a lazy beggar, a parasite on society, and a man of no value whatsoever. The monk did not defend himself, he did not get angry, he did not argue, he simply listened to the tirade with a gentle, serene smile on his face, as if he were listening to the sweet singing of a forest bird. When the landlord finally ran out of breath, red-faced and panting from his outburst, the monk looked up and asked a simple, polite question that caught everyone by surprise. The monk asked if a person decided to bring a valuable gift to a friend, but the friend politely declined to accept the package, to whom would the gift belong in the end? The landlord, confused by the question, replied impatiently that if the gift was rejected, it would obviously remain with the person who brought it in the first place. The monk nodded his head, his eyes shining with a playful warmth, and explained that he politely declined to accept the insults, the anger, and the judgment that the landlord had brought to the tree today. Since those negative words were not accepted, they remained entirely with the landlord, who would have to carry them back to his grand mansion, while the monk remained under the banyan tree, perfectly clean, perfectly light, and perfectly at peace. The crowd broke into laughter, and the landlord stood speechless, realizing that his anger had done absolutely nothing to damage the monk, but had only exposed his own internal agitation and lack of peace. This story perfectly encapsulates the ultimate power of non-attachment, showing that when you refuse to accept the negative packages that the world throws at you, you remain entirely free from their toxic influence. You become like a polished mirror that reflects the light but does not keep the shadows, allowing everything to pass through your awareness without leaving a single permanent mark on your soul. Letting go is also about accepting the reality of physical aging and the impermanence of our biological bodies, a topic that society often avoids because of a deep-seated fear of mortality and decline. People spend fortunes on creams, surgeries, and treatments to preserve the illusion of permanent youth, fighting a desperate, losing battle against the natural progression of time. When you let go of the attachment to your physical form as your primary identity, you realize that your body is merely a temporary vehicle, a beautiful coat that your soul wears for a brief season in the material realm. Aging is not a tragedy to be mourned, but a beautiful ripening of wisdom, a process where the external beauty fades so that the internal radiance of the spirit can shine forth with absolute clarity. Imagine a magnificent caterpillar that spends its life crawling on green leaves, enjoying the safety of the branches, and viewing the world from its limited, ground-based perspective. There comes a time when the caterpillar must stop eating, must spin a dark cocoon around itself, and must enter into a state of total stillness, where its old body dissolves completely into an amorphous liquid. If the caterpillar resisted this process, if it tried to hold on to its legs, its segments, and its identity as a crawler, it would die inside the cocoon, failing to achieve its ultimate destiny. By letting go of its old form, by allowing the dissolution to happen without resistance, it undergoes a magnificent transformation, breaking through the cocoon as a beautiful butterfly, capable of flying across vast gardens and sipping the nectar of the highest flowers. Human beings must learn to trust this process of spiritual metamorphosis, understanding that every loss, every phase of decline, and every moment of letting go is merely the shedding of a lower form to make way for a higher expression of consciousness. There was an elderly nun who lived in a quiet hermitage in the mountains, who had spent 50 years in deep spiritual contemplation, and as she entered her final days, her physical body became incredibly weak and fragile. Her young disciples gathered around her bed, weeping softly, terrified of losing their beloved teacher, and asking how they would ever find guidance when her physical presence was gone from the world. The old nun opened her eyes, which were still bright and full of a profound, youthful joy, and told them a story about a drop of rain that fell from a cloud high above a vast mountain range. The little raindrop was terrified as it fell through the air, looking down at the jagged rocks below, crying out in fear because it believed that hitting the ground would mean its absolute destruction and end. It tumbled down the mountain slopes, joined a small, rushing stream, entered a roaring river, and eventually found itself flowing toward the edge of a vast, limitless ocean. As it approached the ocean, its fear returned with a vengeance, terrified that it would lose its unique identity, its shape, and its boundaries when it merged with the massive body of water. The moment it touched the surface of the sea, its individual form disappeared completely, but it did not die. Instead it suddenly realized that it had become the entire ocean, vast, deep, eternal, and capable of supporting thousands of ships and living creatures. The old nun looked at her disciples, her breath growing softer, and explained that her body was merely that tiny raindrop, and her death was not a loss of life, but the beautiful merging of the drop into the vast ocean of universal awareness. She closed her eyes with a peaceful smile, letting go of her final breath with absolute grace, leaving her disciples in a state of quiet awe, their tears drying up as they felt the sudden, expansive presence of her spirit filling the entire room. The art of letting go is not something that you can learn by reading books or analyzing concepts with your logical intellect, but a daily, practical training that happens in the smallest moments of your ordinary life. It happens when you are stuck in a traffic jam, and instead of honking your horn, getting angry, and ruining your morning, you decide to let go of your need to arrive early, and instead enjoy the music on the radio. It happens when someone cuts you off in conversation, and instead of defending your ego, fighting for the last word, and proving your point, you choose to remain silent, letting go of the need to be right. In these tiny choices, you are slowly, steadily retraining your brain, breaking the ancient habits of reactivity and attachment, and building a powerful reservoir of internal peace that can withstand any external crisis. Consider the difference between a clenched fist and an open hand, which is the most basic physical representation of the choice that every human being faces in every single moment of their existence. A clenched fist represents tension, resistance, defensiveness, and a desperate desire to hold on to something, a posture that requires constant muscular effort and quickly leads to fatigue and pain. An open hand, on the other hand, represents relaxation, trust, receptivity, and absolute freedom, a posture that requires no effort, allows things to come and go without friction, and is always ready to receive new blessings. When you live your life with a clenched fist, trying to trap everything inside your narrow grip, you are constantly exhausted, and your narrow worldview prevents you from seeing the vast opportunities that are floating just outside your fingers. When you transform your life into an open hand, you realize that you do not need to trap the world to enjoy it. You can let the winds blow through your fingers, let the water flow through your palm, and remain perfectly content, perfectly rich, and perfectly whole. There was a young wanderer named Yasa, who was walking through a dense forest during a dark, moonless night, carrying a small paper lantern that illuminated a tiny patch of ground just a few inches in front of his feet. He was terrified of the darkness, gripping the handle of the lantern with immense force, staring intently at the small circle of light, afraid that if he looked away for a single second, he would stumble over a root or fall into a hidden pit. As he walked, a sudden gust of wind blew through the trees, extinguishing the candle inside his lantern instantly, plunging him into absolute, terrifying darkness. He froze in place, his heart pounding, his body trembling, believing that he was completely doomed, unable to move a single step forward or backward in the black void of the forest. As he sat there, refusing to move, his eyes slowly began to adjust to the absence of the artificial light, and as the fear began to leave his chest, he looked up through the canopy of the trees above him. To his absolute amazement, he saw that the sky was filled with millions of bright, glittering stars, and a magnificent full moon was casting a soft, ethereal silver light across the entire forest floor. The darkness was not an enemy that had swallowed him, but a beautiful curtain that had been drawn aside, revealing a vast, cosmic illumination that had been there all along, hidden only by the small, narrow light of his own tiny lantern. If his lantern had never been blown out, he would have spent the entire night staring at the dusty path, completely blind to the spectacular beauty of the universe that was waiting to guide his steps. This story beautifully illustrates that our small, egoic attachments, our specific plans, and our limited understandings are like that tiny paper lantern, giving us a false sense of security while blinding us to the vast, cosmic wisdom that surrounds us. When the universe blows out your lantern, when it takes away your specific plan or your familiar security, it is not an act of cruelty, but an invitation to look up, to expand your vision, and to trust the magnificent moonlight of the cosmos. The things that you think you are losing when you let go are almost always the very things that were keeping you small, keeping you trapped, and keeping you blind to the infinite abundance of your true nature. By letting go of the small, you gain the vast. By letting go of the temporary, you discover the eternal, and by letting go of your false identity, you awaken to the magnificent truth of who you truly are. Letting go of expectations in relationships is perhaps one of the most powerful ways to cultivate a deep, abiding happiness that is not dependent on the behavior of other people. Many individuals enter into friendships and marriages with a hidden list of demands, expecting their partners to act in specific ways, to anticipate their needs perfectly, and to never make mistakes. This unspoken script creates a constant tension, turning the relationship into a battlefield of disappointments, where every minor flaw is seen as a personal betrayal rather than a natural expression of human imperfection. When you let go of the script, when you stop demanding that the other person be a perfect character in your personal movie, you open the door to unconditional love, accepting them exactly as they are with all their quirks, their struggles, and their unique ways of navigating the world. Think about the way you look at a wild tree in the middle of a forest. You do not look at it with anger or criticism if its branches are crooked, if its leaves are uneven, or if it leans slightly to one side due to the wind. You do not demand that it become a perfectly symmetrical pine tree if it is a gnarled oak. You simply appreciate it for what it is, recognizing that its imperfections are precisely what give it its unique character, its beauty, and its strength. Why can we not apply this same beautiful wisdom to the human beings in our lives, allowing them to be crooked, uneven, and unique, rather than constantly trying to trim their branches to fit our narrow definitions of perfection? There was a village elder named Cassapa, who had spent decades trying to control the life of his adult son, demanding that the young man take over the family farming business, marry a woman of the elder's choosing, and live a life of predictable, traditional respectability. The son, however, possessed a deep passion for painting, spending his nights sketching the landscapes of the valley, and showing absolutely no interest in the fields or the social games of the local nobility. This conflict created a massive wall of silence between the two men, filled with bitter arguments, mutual resentment, and a constant feeling of disappointment that poisoned the atmosphere of their home. One evening, after a particularly harsh argument, Cassapa walked out into the fields, sitting under the stars, his heart heavy with grief and anger, feeling that his entire life's work had been a failure because his son refused to obey his wishes. An old wandering teacher happened to be resting near the edge of the field, and seeing the distress of the elder, the teacher offered a simple, profound analogy that shattered Cassapa's rigid perspective. The teacher asked if Cassapa had ever planted a mango seed in his garden, to which the elder replied that he had planted many, tending to them with great care throughout his long life. The teacher then asked if Cassapa had ever tried to force that mango seed to produce sweet apples, or if he had ever gotten angry at the tree because it grew into a mango tree instead of a rose bush. Cassapa laughed, saying that would be foolish, because a seed can only grow into what it inherently is, and the duty of the gardener is simply to provide soil, water, and space, rather than dictating the fruit. The teacher looked into Kasapa's eyes, explaining that his son was a unique seed planted in the garden of his life, a seed that carried the blueprint of an artist, not a farmer. By trying to force him to be a farmer, Kasapa was acting like a foolish gardener trying to squeeze apples out of a mango tree, creating nothing but frustration, bitterness, and destruction for both of them. The elder stood silent, the truth of the words penetrating deep into his soul, allowing him to see that his control was not an expression of love for his son, but an expression of his own egoic desire for continuity and pride. He returned to the house, walked into his son's room, looked at the beautiful sketches of the valley with fresh eyes, and for the first time in his life, he genuinely let go of his expectations for the young man's future. He told his son that he was free to paint, that the fields would be managed by others, and that his only wish was for his son to be a magnificent expression of whatever seed he carried inside his heart. The wall of resentment collapsed instantly, replaced by a deep, tearful embrace, and the son, feeling the immense freedom of his father's acceptance, went on to become an artist whose paintings brought joy, peace, and inspiration to thousands of people across the country. The act of letting go is not about denying your feelings, repressing your emotions, or pretending that you do not care about the outcomes of your actions, but rather about changing your relationship to those outcomes. You can work with 100% dedication, you can invest your creative energy into a project, you can love someone with all your heart, while simultaneously remaining unattached to the specific results of your efforts. This state of being is known as passionate non-attachment, where you play the game of life with absolute enthusiasm, joy, and presence, while fully recognizing that the prize at the end is completely secondary to the beauty of the play itself. When you operate from this space, you are completely free from the paralyzing fear of failure, because failure is no longer seen as a destruction of your identity, but simply as an interesting piece of feedback from the universe. Consider a professional archer standing before a target, drawing their bowstring back with immense strength, aligning their vision perfectly with the bullseye, and focusing all their energy into the arrow. If the archer is constantly thinking about the prize money, the applause of the crowd, or the shame of missing the target, their muscles will tighten, their breath will become uneven, and their arrow will fly wide of the mark. The perfect shot only happens when the archer lets go of the desire to hit the target, focusing entirely on the pure mechanics of the present moment, allowing the arrow to release itself smoothly, effortlessly, and naturally from the string. The arrow hits the bullseye precisely because the archer let go of the need to win, transforming their action into a beautiful, meditative art form rather than a stressful struggle for achievement. There was a student named Ananda, who was deeply committed to achieving the highest levels of spiritual insight, spending his days and nights meditating with an intensity that became a source of concern for his fellow practitioners. He wanted to achieve liberation so badly that he would become furious with himself whenever a distracted thought entered his mind, viewing his own humanity as an enemy that needed to be violently conquered. He believed that if he could just force his mind into total submission through sheer willpower, he would finally earn the ultimate prize of enlightenment and be free from suffering forever. He went to the teacher, complaining that despite his years of heroic effort, his mind felt like a boiling kettle, full of pressure, tension, and a quiet despair that made him want to abandon the practice altogether. The sage took Ananda to a nearby river where a small wooden boat was tied to a post along the muddy bank, instructing the young man to step inside and untie the rope that held the vessel to the shore. The teacher told Ananda to sit in the center of the boat, to put away the oars, to close his eyes, and to simply allow the current of the river to carry the boat wherever it wanted to go. Ananda was terrified at first, expecting the boat to capsize, to hit a rock, or to be pulled into a dangerous whirlpool, but as the minutes passed, he noticed that the boat floated beautifully, finding its own path through the water. The river knew exactly how to navigate the curves of the landscape, carrying the boat smoothly past the rocks, through the gentle rapids, and into a wide, peaceful valley where the water was as still as a mirror. The sage, walking along the riverbank, looked at Ananda and explained that his spiritual practice had been an attempt to row upstream against the current of reality, using the oars of his ego to force his way to enlightenment. The true awakening is not a destination that you reach by rowing hard, but the realization that you are the river itself, and by letting go of the oars, by trusting the current of your natural awareness, you automatically arrive at the ocean of peace. Ananda took a deep breath, let his body relax into the wooden seat of the boat, and in that moment of total surrender, his rigid striving dissolved completely, revealing the very peace he had been chasing so frantically for many years. To experience the true beauty of letting go, one must develop a deep intimacy with the present moment, understanding that the present is the only space where life actually exists, the only place where true joy can be touched. The past is nothing more than a memory trace in the brain, a ghost that has no independent power unless you choose to revive it with your attention, and the future is a psychological projection, a mirage that always recedes as you approach it. Most human suffering occurs because people are physically in the present moment, but mentally they are living in the ruins of yesterday or the anxieties of tomorrow, turning their lives into a fragmented, stressful experience. When you pull your mind back from the past, when you release your grip on the future, and when you plunge your full attention into the here and now, you discover a profound truth: this moment is almost always perfectly fine. Think about the simple act of breathing in and breathing out, a process that happens thousands of times a day without you ever having to think about it, a continuous cycle of receiving and releasing that keeps you alive. Every time you take a deep, nourishing breath, you are welcoming the oxygen, the energy, and the vitality of the universe into your physical body, filling your lungs with life. You cannot hold on to that breath forever, no matter how precious it is, because if you refuse to let it go, you will suffocate, destroying your own body through your desperate attempt to preserve what must be released. You must let the breath go completely, allowing your lungs to empty out, trusting that the universe will immediately provide another fresh breath the moment you need it. This beautiful rhythm of the breath is the ultimate cosmic template for how we should live our entire lives, understanding that everything we experience, every relationship, every success, every joy, and every sorrow, is merely an inhalation or an exhalation. When a beautiful experience arrives, welcome it fully, breathe it in, enjoy its fragrance, and allow it to nourish your soul to the absolute maximum. When the time comes for that experience to pass away, exhale it completely, let it go without resistance, without crying, and without trying to trap it in your lungs, trusting that the next breath of life will bring its own unique blessings. There was a wandering dervish who lived in an ancient desert town, who owned nothing but a woolen cloak, a wooden bowl, and a small metal key that he wore on a string around his neck. The local villagers were highly curious about the key, noticing that the dervish guarded it with great care, never allowing anyone to touch it, and leading many to believe that he had a secret treasure chest hidden deep in the desert sands. A greedy merchant who lived in the town became obsessed with this key, convinced that if he could steal it, he would gain access to an unimaginable fortune that would make him the richest man in the world. One dark night, while the dervish was sleeping deeply under the porch of the old mosque, the merchant crept up silently, cut the string with a sharp knife, slipped the key into his pocket, and fled into the desert. He searched for days, digging up the sand near every ancient ruins, trying the key on every old chest he could find, but he found nothing, and the key fit no lock in the entire region. Exhausted, dehydrated, and driven half-mad by his failure, he returned to the town, threw the key at the feet of the dervish, and demanded to know what secret treasure this useless piece of metal was supposed to unlock. The dervish picked up the key, smiled with a deep, radiant warmth, tied it back around his neck, and explained that the key did not belong to a physical box filled with gold or silver. He explained that the key was a symbolic reminder to unlock his own heart in every single moment, letting go of the internal locks of judgment, worry, and greed that keep the human spirit in a heavy prison. The key reminded him that his absolute freedom was his true treasure, a wealth that could never be stolen by any thief, because it was located in the space of non-attachment inside his own mind. The merchant stood humbled, realizing that while he owned mansions filled with physical goods, his mind was a dark, stressful prison of anxiety, while the dervish, who owned nothing, possessed the entire universe because his heart was completely unlocked. True wealth is never measured by what you have accumulated in your bank accounts, your closets, or your real estate portfolios, but by how little you require to be perfectly happy, perfectly content, and perfectly at peace in the present moment. When you need nothing from the external world to feel complete, you are wealthier than the greatest kings, because you are no longer a beggar at the gates of circumstance, pleading for happiness from things that are inherently fleeting. You become a king of your own internal landscape, a sovereign being who can enjoy the beauty of a flower, the warmth of the sun, and the company of a friend without ever needing to own them or control them. Consider the metaphor of the sky during a dramatic summer storm. As heavy dark clouds gather, lightning flashes across the horizon, and torrential rain pours down on the earth below. The sky itself does not get angry at the clouds, it does not try to push them away, it does not feel threatened by the violence of the storm, nor does it lose its inherent nature as a blue, vast space. The sky simply allows the storm to happen, giving it full permission to exist, to rage, and to pass away whenever its energy is spent, knowing that above the dark clouds, the sun is still shining with absolute brilliance. When the storm passes, the sky remains perfectly clean, perfectly blue, and perfectly quiet, completely unhurt and unscarred by the turbulence that just occurred within its vast expanse. Human beings must learn to cultivate this sky-like mind, an expansive awareness that can accommodate the storms of life, the rains of sorrow, and the winds of criticism without being damaged by their movement. Your true essence is that vast, blue sky, a sacred space of awareness that is inherently peaceful, clear, and bright, untouched by the passing clouds of your thoughts and emotions. When you learn to identify with the sky rather than with the clouds, you can watch your anxieties, your fears, and your sadness come and go with a sense of gentle curiosity, knowing that they are just temporary weather patterns that will soon pass away. There was an old pottery master who lived near a fast-flowing river, creating magnificent ceramic vessels that were famous for their perfect shapes, their smooth glazes, and their unique artistic designs. One day, a young apprentice arrived at his workshop, eager to learn the secrets of the craft, but the young man was incredibly clumsy, breaking several beautiful pots every week due to his rapid, careless movements. The apprentice would become deeply depressed every time a pot shattered, cursing his own hands, crying over the ruined clay, and feeling that he would never be able to master the art of pottery. The old master did not get angry at the boy, nor did he mourn the lost vessels. Instead he would simply sweep up the broken pieces, throw them back into the water to soften, and begin spinning a new pot on his wheel. He told the apprentice that the clay is never truly ruined, it merely changes its shape, transitioning from a lump of mud into a beautiful vase, then into broken shards, and then back into soft mud ready to be shaped again. The only reason the apprentice was suffering was because he had fallen in love with a specific form of the clay, failing to see that the true magic was not in the finished vase, but in the flexible, eternal nature of the clay itself. When you realize that your life is made of that same flexible, eternal clay, you stop crying over the broken vessels of your plans, your businesses, or your relationships, knowing that you can always gather the pieces, soften them with your wisdom, and shape them into something even more magnificent on the wheel of experience. The journey of letting go is ultimately a return to innocence, a process of peeling away the heavy layers of social conditioning, egoic pride, and psychological armor that we have accumulated throughout our lives. We are all born into this world with an open, curious, and joyful heart, much like a young child who can play for hours with a simple stick, find wonder in a crawling beetle, and laugh without any inhibition. As we grow older, we are taught to fear, to compete, to compare ourselves with others, and to protect our egos with thick walls of defensiveness, turning our bright inner light into a dim, guarded flame. By practicing the art of letting go, we are not learning a new skill, we are simply remembering our original nature, uncovering the beautiful diamond of our soul that has been hidden under the dust of our worldly anxieties for far too long. Letting go of the past allows the heart to heal, letting go of the future allows the mind to rest, and letting go of the ego allows the spirit to soar into its true, limitless freedom. Think about the way a great river flows toward the ocean, winding its way through rugged mountains, dense forests, and wide plains, encountering thousands of obstacles along its long, difficult journey. When the river hits a massive rock, it does not throw itself against the stone in a fit of anger, trying to smash the obstacle out of its way through brute force, which would only waste its water and stop its movement. The river simply finds the path of least resistance, flowing gently around the rock, cutting through the softer soil, and continuing its journey toward the sea without losing a single drop of its essential nature. It adapts its shape to the landscape, becoming narrow and fast in the canyons, wide and slow in the valleys, but always maintaining its deep, underlying purpose of returning to the boundless ocean from which it came. Human beings must learn to flow through life with that same fluid intelligence, recognizing that obstacles are not enemies designed to block their paths, but merely interesting shape-shifters that invite them to find new ways of moving forward. When you stop fighting the rocks of circumstance, when you let go of your rigid demand that the path must be perfectly straight and smooth, you discover that the detour itself is often the most beautiful, enriching part of your entire journey. There was an ancient general who had won dozens of battles for his emperor, but as he reached old age, he grew deeply weary of the violence, the noise, and the endless political intrigues of the imperial court. He decided to resign his post, surrender his golden armor, his sharp swords, and his high titles, and retire to a small, quiet cottage in a remote mountain valley where he could spend his remaining years in peaceful contemplation. His former soldiers and colleagues were completely shocked by his decision, believing that he had lost his mind, wondering how a man who had tasted supreme power and glory could be content with a humble life of growing vegetables and sweeping his own floor. One day, a young officer who had served under him visited the cottage, expressing his confusion, and asking if the general did not miss the thrilling sound of the war drums, the respect of the troops, and the luxury of the palace. The old general smiled, took the young officer to a small mountain stream that was trickling softly over smooth pebbles near his garden, and asked the young man to listen to the sound of the water. He explained that when he wore his heavy armor, he was constantly on guard, terrified of being assassinated, stressed about the strategies of the next battle, and his heart was as hard as the steel of his sword. By letting go of his titles and his armor, he had not lost his power, but had instead discovered a far greater, unshakable strength, the power of a quiet mind that could hear the music of the stream and feel the warmth of the morning sun. He was no longer a general commanding a few thousand mortal men, he had become a companion of the mountains, a brother to the clouds, and a king of his own peaceful heart, which was a territory that no enemy army could ever invade or conquer. The story of the general reminds us that true power is never found in the ability to dominate others, to control outcomes, or to command resources, but in the supreme ability to govern our own internal reactions and find absolute contentment in the simplest things. When you let go of the heavy armor of your ego, you become vulnerable, yes, but you also become accessible, soft, and capable of experiencing the deep, nourishing currents of love and connection that make life truly worth living. You stop viewing the world as a battlefield where you must constantly defend yourself, and instead begin to see it as a beautiful, sacred playground where you can interact with all living beings with a heart full of trust, warmth, and boundless compassion. Consider the metaphor of a hot air balloon resting on the green grass, its grand colorful canopy fully inflated, its engine roaring with a powerful fire, yet unable to lift off into the sky because it is held down by dozens of thick ropes tied to heavy sandbags on the ground. The pilot can increase the flame, making the air inside the balloon hotter and hotter, trying to force the vehicle into the air through sheer power, but as long as the ropes remain anchored to the sandbags, the balloon will only strain, vibrate, and remain stuck on the ground. The breakthrough does not happen by adding more fire, by straining harder, or by building a bigger engine, but by simply walking over to the ropes and cutting them one by one, releasing the heavy sandbags that are binding the basket to the earth. The moment the final rope is severed, the balloon does not crash, it does not disappear into chaos, but instead lifts off effortlessly into the vast blue sky, floating high above the hills, moving gracefully with the wind, and experiencing a magnificent, panoramic view of the entire world. Most people spend their lives trying to increase the fire of their strivings, working harder, sleeping less, accumulating more resources, hoping that through sheer willpower, they can lift their heavy hearts out of the muck of anxiety and depression. They fail to see that their spirits are naturally designed to float, to be light, and to experience the vast sky of joy, and the only things keeping them grounded are the heavy sandbags of their attachments, their grudges, and their rigid expectations. By consciously cutting those ropes, by letting go of the old hurts, the material anxieties, and the need for approval, you allow your spirit to do what it naturally loves to do, rise effortlessly into the beautiful heavens of peace and serenity. There was a wandering merchant named Sabita, who was traveling across a dangerous desert with a caravan of rare spices, and as they entered the heart of the waste, a sudden, massive sandstorm overtook them, blinding the guides and scattering the camels in every direction. Sabita found himself completely alone in the vast dunes, his water skin leaking, his food supplies buried under the sand, and the heat of the midday sun beating down on his head with a merciless intensity. Driven by panic, he began to run blindly across the dunes, searching for an oasis, crying out for help, his throat burning with thirst, and his mind filled with a terrifying vision of dying alone in the desert. As his strength began to fade, he collapsed on the side of a tall dune, his eyes closing, his muscles giving up, and in that moment of absolute exhaustion, he realized that his frantic running was only making his thirst worse and draining his final reserves of life. He stopped fighting the heat, stopped cursing the storm, and simply laid his body flat on the warm sand, closing his eyes, and letting go of his desperate desire to survive, accepting whatever fate the universe had in store for him. The moment he surrendered his resistance, his mind entered into a state of profound, unexpected stillness, his heart stopped racing, and his ears became sensitive to the subtle sounds of the desert environment around him. In that deep silence, he heard a faint, rhythmic sound, a gentle rustling of leaves and the soft trickling of water, coming from a shallow valley just on the other side of the dune where he was resting. He climbed up the ridge with a calm, deliberate pace, and discovered a hidden, beautiful oasis filled with cool, sweet water and shade trees, a sanctuary that he would have completely missed if he had continued running frantically in his state of panic. This story demonstrates that the solutions to our greatest crises are almost never found through frantic, panic-driven action, but through the deep, quiet clarity that arises when we first allow ourselves to stop struggling and accept the reality of our situation. When you let go of the panic, your mind becomes like a calm, undisturbed lake, capable of reflecting the surrounding landscape with absolute accuracy, allowing you to see the path forward with perfect clarity. The art of letting go is the ultimate path to true freedom, a freedom that is not dependent on your external circumstances, your financial status, or the behavior of the people around you, but is rooted entirely in the spacious nature of your own mind. When you master this art, you walk through the world like a shadowless being, participating fully in all the joys and challenges of human existence, while remaining completely independent of their outcomes, untouched by blame, and uninflated by praise. The beautiful spaciousness that opens up in the human soul when the heavy chains of attachment are finally broken is not an empty, hollow void, but a radiant arena of absolute clarity, joy, and peace. Many people live their lives under the constant, exhausting illusion that they must defend their opinions, protect their fragile egos, and constantly prove their worth to an indifferent world. They spend an immense amount of internal energy arguing over petty matters, trying desperately to have the last word in every discussion, and feeling deeply wounded whenever someone fails to validate their personal viewpoint. This rigid need to be right, to be seen as intelligent, and to control the perceptions of others is a heavy anchor that keeps the mind in a state of perpetual friction and defensive warfare. The moment a person develops the inner maturity to smile, to step back, and to let go of the need to win an argument, they do not lose their intelligence or their dignity, but instead they inherit a profound, unshakable serenity. They realize that their inner peace is far too precious to be traded for the cheap satisfaction of proving someone else wrong, understanding that everyone sees the world through their own unique, limited lens of conditioning. During the blessed days when the great teacher walked the earth, there was a brilliant young scholar named Rohitasa, who had mastered all the traditional philosophies, sciences, and debates of his era, earning immense praise from the kings and nobles of the valley. He was incredibly proud of his sharp intellect, using his verbal skills to defeat every rival philosopher who crossed his path, viewing his mind as a magnificent weapon that could conquer any intellectual territory. He traveled far and wide, searching for the awakened one, with the explicit intention of challenging the teacher to a grand public debate, hoping to solidify his reputation as the greatest thinker in the land. He found the teacher sitting quietly under the shade of an old mango tree, surrounded by a simple group of farmers, sweepers, and monks who were listening to a gentle talk about the beauty of kindness. Rohitasa stepped forward into the circle, his chest puffed out, his eyes shining with intellectual arrogance, and began to unleash a barrage of complex, trick questions about the origin of the cosmos, the nature of the soul, and the definitions of ultimate reality. The teacher did not respond with defensive arguments, nor did he engage in the complex word games that the scholar had prepared with such intense calculation. The sage simply looked into the eyes of the young man with a gaze of profound, unconditional tenderness, a look that seemed to see past the sharp armor of the scholar's intellect directly into the deep, hidden layers of his loneliness and anxiety. The teacher remained completely silent for a long moment, allowing the evening breeze to rustle the leaves above, until the aggressive energy of the scholar began to falter under the weight of that immense, peaceful presence. The awakened one then spoke in a gentle, melodic voice, asking Rohitasa if a man who is carrying a heavy, burning torch through a dark forest should spend his time analyzing the chemical composition of the fire, or if he should simply use the light to find his way home safely before his fingers are burned. The teacher explained that intellectual debates are like that burning torch. If you hold on to them too tightly out of pride, they will inevitably scorch your own hand, blinding you to the simple, beautiful reality of the present moment. The true liberation of the mind is not achieved by accumulating more concepts, winning more arguments, or defeating more rivals, but by letting go of the heavy burden of the intellectual ego itself. The words of the sage penetrated deep into the heart of Rohitasa, shattering the rigid walls of his pride, and for the first time in his life, he felt the immense weight of his intellectual armor drop to the ground. He realized that his constant need to debate and to prove his superiority was merely a clever mask designed to hide his deep fear of vulnerability and his craving for external validation. He sat down on the dusty earth, bowing his head before the teacher, letting go of his titles, his complex philosophies, and his competitive drive, allowing his mind to dissolve into the grand, quiet stillness of the mango grove. In that total surrender of his intellectual ego, a wave of radiant, tranquil joy filled his entire chest, and he understood that by losing his status as an undefeated debater, he had gained something infinitely greater, the absolute freedom of an unburdened mind. The human mind often functions like a busy marketplace, filled with the loud, chaotic voices of desires, worries, fears, and regrets, all competing for our limited attention and draining our vital energy day after day. People become so habituated to this internal noise that they begin to mistake the chaos for their true identity, believing that they are the anxious thoughts, the fearful projections, and the bitter memories that drift through their consciousness. They live in a constant state of internal reactivity, jumping like a frantic monkey from one thought branch to another, never experiencing the deep, nourishing ground of pure, undisturbed presence. The practice of letting go is the sacred art of stepping out of the noisy marketplace of the mind, sitting on the quiet riverbank of awareness, and simply watching the thoughts pass by without ever jumping into the current. Think about a glass of muddy water that has been taken from a rushing river. If you agitate the glass, if you stir the water constantly with a spoon, or if you try to violently filter out the dirt with your fingers, the water will only become muddier and more turbulent. The only way to make the water clear is to set the glass down on a flat surface, to leave it completely alone, and to allow the natural law of gravity to take its course without any interference from your hands. As the glass sits in absolute stillness, the heavy particles of mud slowly, steadily settle to the bottom of their own accord, and the water naturally returns to its original state of pure, transparent clarity. Your mind operates on this exact same principle. When you face a crisis, when your thoughts are turbulent, and when your emotions are running high, your frantic attempts to fix your mind through intellectual analysis will only create more confusion. By practicing the inner art of non-resistance, by setting your mind down in the space of silent observation, you allow the muddy thoughts of anxiety and fear to settle to the bottom of your awareness naturally. You do not need to fight your thoughts, you do not need to destroy your negative emotions, you simply need to let go of your attachment to them, allowing the inherent clarity of your true nature to shine forth beautifully. There was a humble pottery maker named Satya, who lived in a small village during the ancient days, and he was known for his gentle disposition, his simple lifestyle, and his unique ability to remain calm in the face of life's daily frustrations. A wealthy merchant from the city, who was constantly suffering from chronic insomnia, digestive issues, and intense mental anxiety, heard about the peaceful potter and traveled to his workshop to discover the secret of his tranquility. The merchant asked how the potter could manage to smile all day long, despite living in a dusty shack, earning barely enough coins to buy rice, and working under the hot sun from morning until night. Satya smiled, stopped his wooden wheel, washed the gray clay from his hands, and asked the merchant to look closely at the large, heavy stone balance wheel that he used to spin his pots. He explained that when he wants to shape a beautiful vase, he must exert effort to spin the heavy stone wheel until it reaches a perfect, harmonious velocity, allowing the clay to rise smoothly under his gentle fingers. Once the wheel is spinning with its own momentum, he must completely remove his feet from the mechanism, letting his hands become soft and receptive, allowing the spinning force to do the work without any aggressive forcing. If he kept kicking the wheel while trying to shape the delicate clay, his movements would be jerky, the wheel would vibrate violently, and the fragile vase would collapse into a shapeless lump of mud in an instant. The potter looked at the anxious merchant, explaining that the merchant's life was suffering because he was constantly kicking the wheel of his circumstances, trying to force every event, every person, and every business deal to fit his rigid desires. Even when his business was running smoothly with its own momentum, his mind was still frantic, worrying about tomorrow, adjusting the parameters, and refusing to let his hands become soft and trusted. The secret to a peaceful life is to know when to exert a clean, honest effort, and when to completely remove your feet from the wheel, letting go of the results and trusting the natural momentum of existence to unfold beautifully. The merchant stood still as the simple wisdom of the potter washed over his troubled spirit, realizing that his wealth had become a heavy cage because he lacked the internal capacity to let go of his control. He returned to his mansion, adjusted his approach to his business, stopped micromanaging his servants, and began to practice the art of letting the wheel spin without his constant, anxious interference. His insomnia vanished within a week, his health returned, and he discovered that by releasing his tight grip on his empire, his profits actually stabilized, and his relationships became filled with genuine warmth and mutual respect. The deep fear of emptiness is perhaps the ultimate psychological barrier that prevents human beings from embracing the liberating path of non-attachment and letting go. People look at a life without intense desires, without material accumulation, and without social drama as a boring, lifeless desert, failing to see that true emptiness is actually a state of infinite fullness and radiant potential. It is only when an apartment is completely emptied of its old, broken, dusty furniture that it becomes a beautiful, bright space capable of welcoming fresh air, golden sunlight, and beautiful new experiences. An empty hand is not a sign of poverty, but a profound symbol of absolute readiness, an open portal through which the entire abundance of the universe can flow without any obstruction or limitation. Consider the beautiful phenomenon of an echo in a deep mountain canyon. If you stand at the edge of the cliff and shout a word of joy, the canyon returns that joy to you 100-fold, filling the entire valley with magnificent vibrations. The canyon can only create this beautiful resonance because it is completely empty inside, containing nothing but vast space that allows the sound waves to bounce, expand, and return in their full glory. If the canyon were packed tight with solid dirt, concrete, and heavy stones, your voice would die instantly upon the surface, producing nothing but a dull, flat silence that could never move the heart of anyone. Human beings must learn to become like that empty canyon, hollowing out their internal spaces from the heavy debris of pride, prejudice, and egoic clinging, so that the beautiful music of life can resonate through them effortlessly. There was an old master named Subhuti, who lived in a remote bamboo forest, and he was so advanced in his practice of emptiness that his mind had become completely transparent, reflecting the beauty of the forest without retaining a single shadow. It was said that whenever he sat in deep meditation under his favorite banyan tree, the very spirits of the forest would become so touched by his absolute peace that they would rain down white blossoms upon his shoulders out of pure reverence. A young, ambitious seeker traveled to the forest, witnessing this miraculous event, and begged Subhuti to teach him the secret formula, the specific meditation technique, or the sacred mantra that could attract such heavenly blessings. Subhuti opened his eyes, smiled with a deep, silent warmth, and told the young seeker that the blossoms did not fall because he was doing something special, but rather because he had stopped doing everything completely. He explained that as long as the young man was chasing after miracles, trying to achieve high states of meditation, and accumulating spiritual experiences as badges of honor, his mind was full of noise and spiritual ambition. The spirits of the forest did not rain flowers upon his achievements, but upon his absolute absence, upon the beautiful, empty space where his ego used to be, a space that was so quiet that the flowers simply fell down to fill the peace. The young seeker understood the lesson, realized that his spiritual journey had been just another subtle game of his ego, a desire to become famous as an enlightened master rather than truly dissolving into the truth. He abandoned his techniques, let go of his desire for miracles, and simply allowed himself to sit in the forest as a humble, empty vessel, free from the tension of seeking. As his spiritual ambition dissolved into the quiet air, his mind settled into a state of absolute, sky-like transparency, and he suddenly felt a soft, cool touch upon his shoulder, looking down to see a single, beautiful white blossom resting gently against his worn robe. The art of letting go is intimately connected to the deep cultivation of humility, a virtue that is often misunderstood in modern society as a form of weakness, self-deprecation, or a lack of personal confidence. True humility is not about thinking less of yourself, but about thinking of yourself less, a state of being where you are no longer obsessed with your own image, your own status, and your own comfort. A truly humble person possesses an immense, unshakable inner strength because they have let go of the heavy burden of trying to impress everyone, allowing themselves to be perfectly comfortable with being small, ordinary, and unnoticed. They are like the fertile earth beneath our feet, which quietly supports all trees, flowers, and living creatures without ever demanding praise, yet containing the infinite life force that sustains the entire world. Think about the way water behaves in nature, always flowing downward toward the lowest places, settling in the humble valleys and dark ravines that human beings often overlook or despise. Because water is willing to occupy the lowest positions without any pride or resistance, it naturally gathers into grand lakes, rushing rivers, and vast oceans, becoming the absolute source of life and nourishment for every living thing on the planet. Water does not fight against the stones, it does not argue with the banks, it simply yields, bends, and flows, yet through its persistent gentleness, it can carve through the hardest granite mountains over time. By embodying the humble, yielding nature of water, a human being becomes truly invincible, moving through the world with an effortless grace that can overcome any rigid obstacle through the sheer power of gentleness and non-attachment. There was an old, wise elder named Mahakassapa, who was highly revered within the spiritual community for his deep wisdom, his strict discipline, and his closeness to the great teacher, causing kings and wealthy merchants to bow whenever he entered their cities. Despite his high standing, he preferred to spend his days walking through the poorest quarters of the capital, collecting his daily alms food from the humblest huts of the lepers, the weavers, and the outcasts of society. His disciples often questioned his choice, suggesting that he should accept the grand invitations of the royal court, where he would be served pure, nutritious food in golden bowls, rather than eating the dry, coarse scraps of the poor. Mahakassapa smiled gently, explaining that the kings who offered grand gifts were often fueled by a subtle pride, a desire to accumulate spiritual merit, and an attachment to their status as generous patrons of the order. The poor widow who shared a tiny spoonful of her coarse rice, on the other hand, was offering her entire heart, an act of pure, unadulterated love that carried no expectations, no pride, and no desire for public recognition. By eating the humble food of the poor, he was helping them unlock the immense treasure of their own innate compassion, while simultaneously keeping his own mind free from the subtle, poisonous traps of luxury and spiritual arrogance. He explained that a true practitioner must be like a refined sifter, allowing the gold of praise and the dust of blame to pass through their fingers with equal indifference, never retaining a single grain of either within their heart. The moment you begin to believe the praise of the world, your spirit becomes heavy, rigid, and dependent on external validation, turning your spiritual life into a shallow performance designed to please the crowd. By remaining small, humble, and deeply connected to the simplest realities of life, you preserve your absolute freedom, allowing your soul to remain light, pure, and completely unburdened by the illusions of the world. The human heart is naturally designed to be an open channel of boundless compassion, a beautiful spring that continuously flows with love, kindness, and empathy toward all living beings without any exception. This natural flow is often blocked by the heavy boulders of our personal attachments, our narrow definitions of family, race, and nationality, and our constant desire to protect our own exclusive circle of comfort. We tend to love only those who agree with us, those who belong to our group, and those who treat us with kindness, viewing the rest of the world with a sense of cold indifference, suspicion, or active hostility. By practicing the art of letting go, we slowly, steadily remove these heavy boulders from our hearts, allowing our personal affection to expand into a vast, universal ocean of empathy that can embrace the entire world with equal warmth. Imagine a bright sun shining high in the blue sky during a clear summer morning, radiating its warm, life-giving light across the entire landscape without asking for a single coin in return. The sun does not choose to shine only on the beautiful rose gardens of the grand palaces while leaving the dark, muddy ditches of the slums in cold shadow. It showers its light with absolute impartiality upon the saint and the thief, the rich man and the beggar, the flower and the weed, knowing that all things are interconnected parts of the grand tapestry of existence. When your heart becomes like that sun, free from the narrow attachments of the ego, your love ceases to be a transactional trade, transforming into a natural, radiant state of being that sweetens the lives of everyone who crosses your path. There was an advanced woman practitioner named Kima, who had spent the first half of her life living as a powerful queen in a luxurious palace, surrounded by beautiful silks, rare jewels, and hundreds of servants who anticipated her every whim. She had been deeply attached to her physical beauty, spending hours before the mirror adornments, believing that her royal status and her appearance were the ultimate guarantees of her happiness and security. Through a sudden, deep realization of the transience of youth and the inevitability of physical decay, she made the courageous decision to walk away from the palace, surrendering her crown, her robes, and her privileges to enter the order of nuns. Many years later, while she was walking through a quiet forest path on her way to a remote hermitage, she was confronted by a notorious bandit who had terrorized the region for decades, known for his cold cruelty and his hatred of spiritual practitioners. The bandit stood before her with a sharp dagger, laughing aggressively, and demanding that she surrender her woolen robe, her wooden bowl, and give up her calm expression, threatening to end her life if she did not show fear. Kima did not flinch, she did not cry out for help, she did not make a single movement to defend herself. Instead she looked into the wild, bloodshot eyes of the bandit with a gaze of absolute, sky-like peace. She smiled with a gentle, motherly warmth, telling the bandit that her robe and her bowl were completely his if he needed them to warm his body or to collect his food, as she possessed nothing in this world that she was not ready to release in an instant. She explained that she had already surrendered her crown, her palace, her beauty, and her entire ego years ago under the tree of wisdom, and therefore, he was standing before a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose. Even her physical life was merely a temporary loan from the earth, a garment that she would gladly lay down whenever the time came, and since she feared no loss, his sharp dagger had absolutely no power to disturb the peace of her soul. The bandit stood frozen, his hand trembling as the blade slipped from his fingers, completely paralyzed by the immense, unshakable power of a human being who had mastered the ultimate art of non-attachment. He had spent his life fighting men who fought back out of fear, men who begged for their lives out of attachment to their gold and their bodies, but he had never encountered a force as terrifyingly beautiful as absolute fearlessness born of total surrender. He fell to his knees in the dust, weeping for the cruelty of his past deeds, begging for her forgiveness, and asking to be allowed to sit near her feet to learn the path of peace that could turn a queen into a sovereign of the universe. This magnificent story reminds us that our deepest security and our ultimate power never come from building thicker walls, accumulating more wealth, or carrying sharper weapons to defend ourselves against the world. Our true invincibility resides entirely in our willingness to lose everything, our capacity to live with open hands, and our absolute freedom from the psychological attachments that turn us into targets for fear and anxiety. When you are no longer clinging to your image, your wealth, your plans, or even your physical body, you become like the wind, a force that can move through the thickest forest of challenges without ever being caught by a single branch. Consider the profound nature of patience, which is not a passive, lazy waiting for things to happen, but the beautiful maturation of a mind that has let go of its aggressive demands for instant gratification. Modern society conditioned people to be incredibly impatient, creating an environment where everything must happen fast, where delays are treated as personal insults, and where individuals are constantly straining to reach the next moment. This permanent state of hurry creates a thick layer of chronic stress over our daily existence, turning our lives into a frantic race toward a finish line that keeps moving further away as we run. By practicing letting go of your rigid timeline, you learn to relax into the natural rhythm of the universe, understanding that everything under the sun requires its own sacred time to ripen, bloom, and mature. Think about a dedicated gardener who plants a tiny apple seed in the fertile soil of his orchard, watering it regularly, clearing away the weeds, and ensuring that it receives the golden sunlight every day. The gardener does not walk out to the field every single hour, digging up the soil to see if the seed has sprouted, or pulling violently on the young green leaves to force the tree to grow faster. He knows that such frantic interference would only destroy the delicate roots, killing the young plant before it ever has a chance to develop its strength. He simply performs his simple, daily duties with a heart full of trust, letting go of the process, and allowing the mysterious, intelligent force of life within the seed to unfold its magnificent potential in its own perfect season. Human beings must learn to treat their own lives, their careers, and their spiritual journeys with that same beautiful, patient trust, understanding that the best things cannot be forced or rushed through sheer egoic willpower. When you pour your honest effort into a project, when you share your love with a friend, or when you practice your meditation, do your part with absolute presence, and then gently step back, letting go of the timeline. Trust that the seeds you have planted in the field of existence are growing quietly beneath the surface of reality, and when the right season arrives, the fruits of joy, success, and wisdom will manifest automatically without any frantic straining from your side. There was a young, enthusiastic monk named Uttiya, who had entered the monastery with a fierce desire to achieve the deep states of tranquility within his first year, sitting for hours in absolute rigidity, refusing to move even when his legs were screaming in pain. Despite his intense effort, his mind remained like a wild storm, full of frustrating thoughts, restless energies, and an overwhelming sense of failure that made him feel deeply bitter toward his fellow practitioners who seemed peaceful. He went to the master of the temple, complaining that his meditation was a constant battle, a stressful tug of war between his desire for quietness and the chaotic reality of his wandering mind. The master took the young monk to the back of the temple where a small, clear stream flowed down from the mountain, forming a beautiful, quiet pool surrounded by smooth stones and green moss. The master picked up a dry pine cone from the ground, threw it into the rushing water of the stream, and asked Uttiya to watch closely how the object behaved as it traveled down the current. The pine cone did not fight the water, it did not try to accelerate its speed, it did not complain when it hit a rock or became temporarily trapped in a small eddy near the bank. It simply yielded its entire weight to the flow of the water, floating gracefully over the rapids, sliding smoothly around the stones, and eventually drifting into the still, calm pool where it rested in absolute peace. The master looked at the young monk, explaining that his meditation was a battle because he was acting like a person trying to force the pine cone to flow according to his personal desires, rather than letting it float with the water. His fierce striving for enlightenment was itself the greatest obstacle to his enlightenment, a thick wall of egoic desire that prevented his mind from settling into its natural state of inherent stillness. To find peace, he must let go of his intense desire to find peace, he must stop fighting his wandering thoughts, and simply allow his awareness to float gracefully on the current of the present moment like that humble pine cone. Uttiya took a deep, relaxing breath, letting his tight shoulders drop, his facial muscles soften, and his rigid posture dissolve into a comfortable, natural seat by the edge of the clear mountain pool. He returned to the meditation hall that evening, not as a fierce warrior trying to conquer his mind, but as a gentle observer, allowing his thoughts, his pains, and his frustrations to come and go without any resistance. Within a few days, the internal warfare ceased completely, the wild storm of his mind dissolved into a vast, ocean-like stillness, and he discovered the true sweetness of liberation, not by doing more, but by letting go of his effort. The concept of letting go is also deeply relevant to how we handle our material possessions, a topic that causes an immense amount of anxiety and conflict in a world that is obsessed with consumerism and accumulation. People are taught from a young age that their happiness is directly proportional to the size of their house, the brand of their vehicle, and the number of luxury items they can store in their closets. They turn their homes into crowded warehouses of material goods, spending their precious lifetimes working in stressful jobs they dislike simply to pay for things they do not even need, becoming slaves to their own properties. They live in a constant dread of being robbed, of their investments crashing, or of their possessions becoming outdated, failing to see that the things they think they own are actually the very things that own them. Think about the beautiful freedom of a wild bird that flies across the sky, migrating thousands of miles across continents without ever carrying a single suitcase, a map, or a bank account along its long journey. The bird survives beautifully because it trusts its own wings. It trusts the abundance of the earth to provide a simple worm or a berry whenever it lands, and it requires nothing more than a small branch to rest its body for the night. If the bird tried to accumulate twigs, if it filled its nest with heavy golden coins, or if it tried to carry its favorite worm across the ocean, it would become too heavy to fly, falling into the sea from utter exhaustion. Human beings must learn to cultivate this beautiful light-hearted simplicity of the wild bird, understanding that the true quality of life is never found in the quantity of our possessions, but in the freedom of our movement. There was a legendary king named Bimbisara, who possessed immense territories, grand palaces, and vaults overflowing with rare gems, but he found his greatest happiness when he walked down to the bamboo grove where the teacher was staying. He would leave his royal chariot at the edge of the forest, remove his golden crown, his jeweled sandals, and his silk robes, walking barefoot through the soft green grass to sit among the simple disciples in absolute humility. He confessed to his closest friends that when he sat on his golden throne surrounded by his guards, his mind was a heavy prison of suspicion, anxiety, and political calculation, always worrying about invasions, rebellions, and betrayals. The moment he stepped into the bamboo grove, owning nothing but his naked feet and his sincere heart, he felt like a free bird that had broken through the bars of its cage, experiencing a profound, radiant peace that none of his riches could ever purchase. He realized that his wealth was only beautiful when it was used as a tool to serve his people, to build shelters for the poor, and to support the spiritual community, rather than being accumulated as a heavy weight to feed his personal pride. By letting go of his psychological attachment to his empire, he became a truly great sovereign, ruling his kingdom not with the iron fist of fear and control, but with the soft, irresistible hand of love, justice, and absolute wisdom. The journey of life is ultimately a profound process of subtraction, an elegant dismantling of the illusions, the expectations, and the attachments that we have mistakenly built around our true essence throughout our worldly existence. We arrive into this physical realm with absolutely nothing in our hands, and when the final hour comes, we will depart from this world with our hands completely empty, leaving behind our wealth, our titles, our reputations, and our biological forms. The only thing that truly matters as we cross that final threshold is how deeply we have loved, how gracefully we have moved through the storms, and how completely we have mastered the sacred art of letting go. By embracing this truth today, while we are still breathing, while our hearts are still beating, we step out of the heavy shadows of fear and anxiety directly into the magnificent, eternal sunlight of true inner freedom.